Thank you, everyone, for coming. And I hope this will be an experience where you can just have a sense of letting go of all the things you've learned so far. It's just an opportunity to reflect. And that's what we're going to do. It's an opportunity to reflect on self-care. You'll notice that I crossed out self-care. And the reason I crossed it out is because what I'm going to talk about is soul care. My whole focus is that when we get in touch with our inner strengths, our values, and what we believe to be true, we can make appropriate decisions and deal with compassion fatigue and burnout. So this is my thesis. The antidote to compassion fatigue is soul care. If you can't remember anything, just remember this, that the antidote to compassion fatigue is soul care. So how many of you feel at times you're just absolutely exhausted? Can you identify with that? And can you just reflect on what that means to you? I remember once I was doing a workshop, and in the middle of it, I said, I can't do this anymore. I just can't do it. And I went to the co-directors and I said, I'm leaving. And they said, you can't leave. You're co-directing this retreat for professional caregivers. And I said, I'm going, I'm gone. And I left. I had to get out of there. And the reason why I did was because I needed to take care of myself. So look at the second slot, the second picture there. Have you ever had a sense of bliss when you were taking care of someone, when you left the room or the person left your office and you just had that sense you were doing right? I remember I was called in to visit a person who was suffering from pneumocystis, a complication of AIDS. And he asked me, he said, what do I think of suicide? And I go, suicide? And he said, yeah, I'm thinking of suicide because I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to be a burden to my family. Well, he was already rejected by his biological family, but his partner's family took him in. And I said, well, what do you think they're going to feel? And he said, oh, I didn't realize that. I said, here they are wanting to do everything to support you, and you're thinking of suicide? And he said, oh, I guess my real gift is to be there for them. And I said, yes. And I remember leaving the room and just feeling this sense of awe. I almost wanted to bow down before the sacred and recognize that my intervention, as simple as it was, helped him to realize that he needed to be there for his adopted family. So you may think of that too. So there's the both ends of the spectrum when you're exhausted and you feel it's the end of the road. And there are other times when you feel, oh my God, I'm just having a powerful experience in what it means to be a healthcare professional. So are you ready to take the plunge? Are you ready to get into the pool? Are you ready to allow yourself to reflect? And my suggestion is that whatever insights emerge during this presentation is what you should respect, what you should write down about your experiences. You may say, I remember when. And that's the important process, because then you allow yourself to just own and recognize that your spirit was really working within you. This is one of my favorite quotes from Dr. James Hillman. He says, there's a wonderful dichotomy between faithless science and unscientific faith. And what that simply means is if I'm going to have surgery, I want to make sure that surgeon knows what he's going to do. You know, I don't want someone fixing bicycles doing surgery on me. So the data is important. And that's called the logos, the practical. On the other hand, there's the mystery of being a physician or a healthcare worker, where you just recognize that you're dealing with sacred interventions. We're not gods, although some healthcare professionals think they are, but we're not gods, but we do sacred work. And that sacred work leads us to our own spirituality, leads us to our own sense of awe. So let's start with, what is compassion fatigue? Well, there's many, many different definitions, but what I like, it's a state of exhaustion related to compassion overload. In other words, we care so much, and we keep caring so much, but we don't use those skills to care for ourselves. And so that's an important distinction. Another important distinction is compassion fatigue is not a mental illness. Most caregivers are frightened to think that if they're experiencing symptoms of compassion fatigue, which leads to burnout, that they may be having a mental breakdown. I would say it's a breakthrough, but it's not a mental illness. And I like what this particular doctor says, Dr. Charles Figley. He says, because we are so attuned to working with others that we pick up what they experience. We suffer vicariously. And so it's an occupational hazard. It's an occupational hazard that we care so much. So there is a lot of discussion between compassion fatigue and burnout. Simply put, compassion fatigue simply has to do with the work that we do. It's an overload, and we're exhausted because of that overload. Whereas burnout has to do with our ideals. We want to be the physicians or the caregivers that we are, and at the same time, the organization we work with prevents that. So there's a problem that occurs because our own human needs are not being taken care of. And I like what Jonathan Mashlash talks about in his book, The End of Burnout. He basically says that burnout is an ailment of the soul. It's a wonderful book on the history of burnout in the United States. We differ in some aspects, which I'll explain. So, who are the caregivers? Well, we all are. If you ask anyone who are the caregivers, they're going to say, well, those who work in healthcare. Well, I've worked in healthcare over 50 years, and I always say, and don't I look great for my age? On the other hand, we all are caregivers, and I expand the definition of caregivers. So we can talk about first responders. We can talk about educators. We could talk about I can't read this. Spouses who care for each other. We could care about healthcare professionals. We could care about safety officers. We could care about home care professionals. We can also care about adult children who care for their parents, or for firefighters. And what about chaplains and pastors? What about emergency medical caregivers? What about social workers, counselors, and therapists? What about parents who care for their children? And what about all those who are present during this pandemic helping, particularly those that work in grocery, pharmacy, and transportation providers? We're all caregivers. We're all caregivers because to be human is having the capacity to care. So compassion fatigue is too much exhaustion leads to compassion fatigue. And again, the antidote to compassion fatigue is self-care? Why is it that so many of us caregivers are notorious in not seeking or developing skills of self-care or compassion resilience? And I'll explain these terms as we go along. What is the resistance we have? And I ask this question, why? Well, it has to do with, on the outside, we think we're fine, but on the inside, we have a different meaning for just fine. Because most of us know what's happening, but we don't know how to address it or where to go. So this is an acronym that a lot of caregivers use. F is for fearful or effed up. I is for insecure. N is for needy. And E is for emotional. So when someone says to you, how are you? And you go, fine. Immediately you just cut off any conversation. I worked in Italy for about 4 years, and if you asked an Italian how they were, they would say, non c'è male, which means there's no badness, but it also was an invitation. If you really want to know more, I'm going to tell you. Do you want to listen to my story? Do you have all day? And in our culture, we just say, fine, and walk away. So there's a tension between our call to service and self-care, or I say soul care, and navigating the 3 cultural taboos that prevent us from seeking self-care. I call this tension the dance of caregiving. At one moment, we're so interested or called to help those in service, and on the other moment, we're saying, but gee, I need to do this. And it goes back and forth. And I'm sure you've had those experiences. So we're going to talk about the 3 cultural taboos. The first one is trust. I have learned not to trust myself. I have learned not to trust my teammates because trusting is dangerous. And if I let people know what's going on, they may think I'm not good enough, or I'm not following the norms, or there's something wrong with me. I was like the first bird there at one time. I said, gee, I could fly. But the second one is, I'm very fearful. I need a parachute. Well, maybe the parachute is reaching out to someone that helps you. The second cultural taboo is talk. I don't communicate my experiences. And so there's a picture there of 2 firefighters, passing each other, and one just sitting there wondering what to do. I was coaching a paramedic, and they went to a fire of a single engine airplane, and the pilot was killed. They could not rescue him. And she said the firefighters just walked around in a daze. And she started to drink heavily and couldn't sleep at night. And finally, her boss said, you need a coach. And she got a coach, and she eventually was able to sort out what was happening. But when she went to the debriefing sessions, the other members of her team called it the Crybabies Club. So it was right there institutionally, well, you had this experience, and, who can you talk to? And if you talk to someone, it means you're weak. The third one is feelings. I'm uncomfortable in admitting what I am feeling. And feelings are dangerous because I remember I was so angry at the situation I was involved in, I probably could have chewed nails. My mother used to say, I'm so angry, I'm going to chew nails. But I remember the movie Children of a Lesser God. Do you remember that movie? Where the art professor falls in love with the custodial person, and as they're getting closer together, she runs away. And he finally finds her and said, why did you leave me? And she said, I thought if I got in touch with my feelings, it would destroy me, but it didn't. It didn't kill her. She was more than her feelings, and she was able to sort them out with appropriate help. How often we're taught to grin and bear it, leave your emotions outside the room. So let's talk about trust. We're wired in our culture to be invincible. I don't need any help. I can do it all myself. Don't you hear that running through your training? I don't need any help. I could do it all myself. I talked to a physician who was in charge of a pediatric intensive care unit. And I said, gee, you're dealing with life and death all the time. What's going to happen, when you have these different situations? Are you able to talk to one of your peers? And he said, if I talk to one of my peers, they're going to think I'm a bad physician because I'm supposed to grin and bear it. We are trained culturally to be rugged individualists. It's part of our culture. And it's part of the Horatio Alger myth, that we keep on trying and we go from rags to riches. And as long as we keep on trying, it's okay. But there's a point where constantly trying doesn't work. So to be invincible, like sometimes we go to work and we feel like we're walking on eggs, waiting for another shoe to drop, unable to recognize and acknowledge those inner voices in us that are saying, stop, stop the world, I want to get off, just stop and allow yourself to reflect. And not trusting ourselves doesn't help us to explore and trust others. So these are the things that go on, and I like what Michael Kearney calls soul pain. We have this pain inside of us that are looking for answers. And he writes, soul pain points us inward and downward to the roots of our humanity and suggests that the connection with our soul is the central issue. That when we get in touch with that pain, we're able to make appropriate decisions. James Hillman again says, the gods come to us through affliction. How many of us had experiences of pain or suffering, and as we were reflecting on it, all of a sudden we got an insight in how to deal with it? So I'm going to talk about soul. It's not Casper the Friendly Ghost. It has to do with having soulmates. It has to do with having soul music. It has to do with soul food. It has to do with soul searching. And it is that animating force within us. So let's look at soulmate. Most of us have a soulmate. It could be a spouse. It could be a best friend. It could be a clergy person, someone that we can go to and that really feel they know who we are. We have shared memories. We have a shared life together. Again, a partner or a spouse. I have a friend that since freshman year in high school that we keep in touch, and that's over 50 years ago. We keep in touch and we keep visiting each other. And we like soul food. Who doesn't like soul food? And there's an Italian expression, heaven is like an Italian kitchen, where you can just add Jewish kitchen or Caribbean kitchen or, an Eastern kitchen. That's what is about soul food. And music is the language of the soul. Just think of Aretha Franklin singing. You move beyond the words, and you're caught up in the song that leads you to reflect. I remember her singing this particular song, and the words just drew me into another landscape. So soul is an animating force within us. We all know that there's life in us. You could look at your hand, the miracle of our hand. It's flesh and spirit right together. And we know when spirit leaves, We know when a person is dead, and we know that something has left. So it's an animating force within us that we can reflect on the lyrics of a song. We can reflect on our children, our spouse. We can reflect on the lines of a poem or the laughter of a child. I remember going to the Muséum d'Orange in Paris, where Claude Monet had his water lilies. And I remember walking down the stairs. You walk down the stairs into this circular panorama of his lilies. And I felt I was walking into a cathedral. It was so sacred. Everything just drew me towards that. And so that is an example of experiencing soul. Being soulful and filled with soul evokes deep feelings within us, and we're able to understand who we are and who we admire. I like what Thomas More talks about soul. He talks about depth. Again, depth. Hillman again says that, psychology is about psyche, but when you talk about soul, you go deeper. There's something about soul that takes you to a deeper place. It's about value. What are our values? What do we hold important? What are our beliefs? It's about relatedness, relating to yourself or relating to others or relating to creation. It's about heart. Remember the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz, if I only had heart instead of being an empty kettle? So it's about movements of our heart. And it's about personal substance, something about who we are as a person that we realize that that's who we are. So that's cultural taboo number one. Cultural taboo number two is you don't talk about your experiences. Talking is dangerous. Leave your emotions home at the door. And sharing your experience is a sign of weakness. You are not holding up to your own end of the job. I remember when I was a hospice chaplain, I was wanting to visit one of the patients, and she said, "Please don't come tomorrow." And so I said, "Are you okay?" And she said, "Yeah, I'm okay." And so I called her the next day and I went to visit her. And she was a party girl. She used to go to Las Vegas, play the piano, play cards. She was just wonderful. And here she was dying with lung cancer. And I said, "How were you yesterday?" And she said, "Shitty." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Black." And she said again, "Shitty." And without, you know, batting an eyelash, I started singing. I feel shitty, oh so shitty. I feel shitty and witty and gay. Well, she burst into laughter. And I could only do that because I knew who she was. And she said, "Yesterday, I met with my children." She had 3 children. And she said, 3 adult children. And she said, "I told them I was dying and they would not listen to me. They wouldn't listen to me. I was dying." Well, anyway, she asked if I could help, and I did an intervention, and we got everyone on the same page. She wanted to talk about her experience, and she wanted to be heard. It's not that she wanted advice. Her children were giving her advice. She wanted to be heard. The truth is that we have normal experiences to traumatic events. Think of today with this pandemic going on and how frustrating and how difficult it is for caregivers, both at home and both in healthcare facilities. They're waiting for something new to happen. They're waiting for some relief. And they're experiencing normal experiences to traumatic events. That's very important to remember, that we're human, and because we're human, think of those wildfires in California in which a whole town was destroyed. How did the first responders respond to that? It had to affect them deeply. Or the floods that occur, or the earthquakes, or the rivers that overflow. So another thing that most of us feel is that we don't want to be a burden to our teammates, family, or friends. And so we hold back. And I say, guess what? You are already a burden to them because of your isolation. The more you isolate yourself, the more it affects your family, friends, and teammates. Why are you isolating yourself? You may feel that that they can't handle your experiences. Well, it's not about them, it's about you trusting them. They want to be part of the situation, and we need to learn how to explain to them, I feel this way, I feel terrible, and I need your help. And oftentimes we may feel that we're not strong enough for the job because we can't handle it. Again, another myth that isn't really true. I love this cartoon. I'm right here in the room, and no one even acknowledges me. Who will listen? I have a story to tell, and I want to be heard. Each of us have a story to tell. It's our life experience. I'm sure if you sat back and looked at your life experience as a caregiver, you would have these wonderful experiences that you felt you did your best. You also may have those experiences where you felt you could have done more, or you felt you were pushed against the wall. But when you allow yourself to get in touch with those stories and you trust someone, here's the other thing. Do you trust someone that can help you? 25 years ago, I was directing a retreat, and I think I mentioned this earlier. And during that retreat, I said, I have to leave, and I left. But something in me said, Edward, you need help. And there was this kind, compassionate Jesuit counselor that I knew, who a year before said, Ed, if you ever need help, let me know. And I went to see him. And during the course of seeing him, I was able to be heard. He heard my story, and that's why I'm here. And I asked him, where am I on the scale of burnout? Because I had compassion fatigue that led to burnout. And he said, you're on a scale between 8 and 9, and I consider 10 irreversible. So what was in me that allowed me to seek help? It's very important that that's there and that he was heard. This is a cartoon I really love. So what do you think? What difference does it make? You never listen anyway. I was just making conversation. When you make conversation, you have to listen too. You do? Just wonderful. So there's 2 resources for active listening. One is in the slides that you got, and it has to do with the Harvard managing tool assessing your ability to be an active listener. And it talks about, when someone is talking, do you plan, how do you respond? And it's usually, sometimes, or rarely. And it's quite interesting that you could go through this and allow yourself to see if you're really a good listener. The second is, I'll be talking about that in a minute, is about, it has to do with to listening. And it has to do with the Department of, the State Department that talks about how to respond as a diplomat. But first of all, I want to give you this experience. I was taking a course and the professor said, there's 3 rules to be a good listener. The first rule is to listen. The second rule is to listen. What's the third rule? To listen. And you know, when you're attentive to the person in front of you, you pick up a lot of clues about listening. So we want to listen with both ears. And that's what the State Department suggests. To listen, one must use both ears, watch and maintain eye contact, give undivided attention, and to be empathetic. And there's a symbol there. The symbol is of a Chinese tree in a box. It's their symbol of a crisis is also an opportunity. And so if you have a tree and it's in a box, will it survive? No. But the tree will try to break out. And so oftentimes the people we care for are reaching out for help. And so think of the branches of a tree. Secondly, they go deep, deep, deep inside themselves. So you can wiggle your toes and feel yourself going into the ground. And they look for something deep. And that's what this other sheet shows that's in your slides. It talks about to seek to understand before you seek to be understood, to be non-judgmental, to give the individual and yourself your undivided attention, to use silence effectively. Sometimes we have to create the space. And it talks about the different colors that are there representing the ear. To think is black, to hear is black, to think is orange, to be present is blue, to see is green, to focus is red, and to feel is a deeper red. And that's in your slides. So the third taboo is don't share your feelings. Oh my God. Leave your emotions outside the door. But what's going on when we're feeling compassion fatigue? We get very emotional. We have emotional instability, sarcasm, racing thoughts, fears, anxieties, isolation. We withdraw. And when we withdraw from our families, it becomes more difficult. We withdraw from interpersonal relationships. That leads to suicidal ideation. There's a high percentage today of caregivers committing suicide. And how do we address that? How do we relate to that? So leave your emotions outside the door. But we're human, aren't we? We care for the patients we care for, so we're concerned about them. And emotions are dangerous. That's what you get for reaching in the cookie jar. You wanted to deal with emotions, guess what? Vroom, plop. So, what is compassion resilience? I remember I was called to a patient care conference where the surgeon asked me to come in and be present to the family. The mother was there, and her daughter was in her 30s who had a cerebral vascular accident. And her theory was, I'll wait a couple days for the bleed before I do any type of surgery. Well, the mother didn't like that. So she offered a referral, and the referral came, and she was discharged. She comes back about 3 weeks later. I meet her in the rehab unit, and she says to me, "Do you remember me?" And a click, click, oh yes, okay. And she starts venting about the surgeon. And I said, I was there, and I remember her giving you opportunities. Well, it was like pouring gasoline on a fire. She just blew up. And I got all the venom of her anger over the situation about her daughter. It wasn't about me, it was about her anger. And I remember I remember leaving the room, walking down the hall, going outside, going back into the hospital, going up the 5th floor. And the social worker that I worked with a lot, she said, Ed, what's happened to you? And I said, don't say a word. I have to scrape all this off of me. And I went literally like this. It's not about me. I have to scrape all that venom, of course I use another word, off of me. And sometimes we think it's about us, but it really isn't. And it's good to recognize when it isn't. So compassion resilience is the ability to maintain what I just said, your physical, emotional, psychospiritual, and mental well-being while responding compassionately to the sufferings of another. You know, compassion comes from 2 words, 2 Latin words. Cum means together, and passio means to suffer with. What caregiver does not suffer because of the people they care for? Because you care for them. It's just part of the I'll say part of being a caregiver. So Dr. Eric Grundy suggests there's 3 steps to overcome compassion fatigue. The first is to admit you have something going on with you. That's the hardest thing for us. I couldn't admit that earlier until it was almost too late. You know, our culture says, keep pushing, try harder. But that doesn't work all the time. And we may have to say, I need some help. I can't solve this by myself. The second is to seek someone who will listen to you. Again, not give you advice, but just say, can I talk to you? I just need you to listen and I need to be heard. And the third is develop some skills of self-care. What's important is that self-care, or as I use soul care, can have many, many, many different ways, practices. It may be meditation. It may be walking. It may be going out to nature. It may be taking a hot shower or a hot bath. It may be walking the dog. You know, it could be anything. And we want to be connected with people. That's another slide in your package. We want to do some type of exercise. I enjoy swimming. And oftentimes if something comes up, I'm just plowing through that water, just allowing myself to get lost. We want to contact, we want to reappraise things. You know, we want to look at how we sleep, how we reflect, how we savor things. You know, do we go to bed each night and say, I'm grateful for this day? Developing a sense of gratitude. So self-care is about listening to your soul. And as I said, soul animates us. It gives us a sense of recovery, a promise of recovery, of a job well done. How do you accept compliments? Do any of you find it difficult to accept compliments? Most of us do. I remember taking this course in Canada, and I was sitting next to this person, and we got to know each other. And she said, "Let's go out to eat." We went out to eat. I had Bermuda shorts on and sandals, and she said, "Ed, I'm gonna say something to you. You may think I'm crazy. Were you going through some hard times 6 months ago?" And I said, "Yeah, really hard time." And she said, "Well, I got this dream of seeing a person's feet wrapped in chains." And she said, I started to pray for that person. And then she said, Ed, they're your feet. What do you do with that? You either think she's a loony bin or you accept the compliment. And I accepted the compliment. So it's something that, we're involved in healing. We're involved in sacred work. And it's a mystery. And when we get compliments, do we just say, oh, it's my job? Or do we say, yeah, that's who I am? The who I am is how I do my job. It's not separate from who I am. So, and you can't pour from an empty cup. You have to take care of yourself. So I love this cartoon in closing. I feel nervous and uneasy. Well, any doctor will tell you that if you have one of these things or are distraught, there's only one sure thing that you need to do better. Simply lie your head in your water dish. Now Snoopy says, this is really hushed up. Hushed up, of course, because it would completely ruin the drug companies. So what Snoopy is saying, do something simple. I'm going to put my head in my water dish. Just when the caterpillar thought the world was over, it became a butterfly. So when we have those feelings of darkness and we're wondering, it becomes a butterfly.